You've probably seen me do other lives on Tuesday. Today, I'm very excited to talk about a topic that I haven't talked about before, and I'm preparing for a Bible Hacks episode that's coming up. Not quite sure when it will be, but I want to have a conversation about this topic, which is trade, because even though Jesus talked about it, it's in the Bible, and it's also like all around us. I think it's almost 60% of the whole world economy is based on trade, and that's even it's even more than that, really, because that definition of trade is imports and exports. So that's international trade compared to the domestic product. So it's more like 100% of the economy is trade. Now, first of all, I want to define trade. So trade is a voluntary exchange of one thing for another thing. It's usually done commercially, in other words, for profit to generate value, but it could be like a barter where you exchange one good for another good. It could be a service or even time. A lot of people trade their time, and in the Bible, there's evidence of trading time, and most of those trades were not good trades. So I want to look at some good trades and some bad trades as well. So, as I said, Jesus talked about it. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you will know that way back in the year 2000, when I wrote my first book, The Faithfulness Myth, that was based on Matthew 25. Some people call it the parable of the talents. Other people call it the parable of the three servants. It's when Jesus told the story of an investor who comes and invests his money with three money managers, and he does it based on the money manager's ability. Now, what ability was he talking about? Well, based on what he rewarded, we could say faithfulness, because he said, "You've been faithful in this," and then he gave them more. So that's what the book looked at. What is faithfulness, and what standards did Jesus have for faithfulness? It was multiplying or doubling. But also, I wanted to look at, based on what they actually did, we could say that it was their faithfulness in trading. Because what they did, what the ones who were rewarded did, was they went and took those talents and they traded them for more. So it was an example of trade. And I don't hear many pastors, I haven't heard any pastors preaching from the pulpit on trade. And yet it's all around us. And it's not just part of our culture, it's in the Bible. Jesus talked about it. So, not just Jesus, it's talked about it right from Genesis. And it's talked about it, Paul talks about it, John talks about it. It's talked about it everywhere in the Bible. So, I wanted to look at the life of Jacob, because he made some doozies. Some really bad trades, but he also made some good trades. So probably the first one that's highlighted is when he traded with his brother. And trading with family can be tricky, but most of Jacob's trades were with family, were with relatives. So he traded with his brother his whole birthright, his right to the inheritance, basically, his whole father's estate. We're told that Jacob, that, his father was very wealthy. And then he traded all of that for a bowl of stew. One little bowl of stew. So he traded something that was an asset, that was increasing in value, that was long term, that was, had a market tangible value for something that was domestic, like just dinner, something that was short term, something that was an expense rather than an asset, something that wasn't going to increase, something that wasn't going to last, it decay very quickly. So it was a really, really bad trade that he made. Now, his trades did get better as he went on, but I just want to highlight that there are some good trades and some bad trades. It was still voluntary. It was still an exchange of one thing for another. And it did provide him with some certainty. And that's one of the major differences between trade and what a lot of pastors do preach on, which is sowing and reaping. So when you sow, and nothing against that, love sowing and reaping. I've taught on that many times. But when you sow, Jesus talked about the sower goes out to sow, and it did multiply. But he said some 30, some 60, some 100. There's an uncertainty when you sow. Your whole crop could be destroyed, and that happened the first 3 times that the sower went out to sow. The bird snatched it, the thorns choked it, and the rocky ground, it was all not good. So sometimes when you sow, you don't get any return at all. And sometimes when you sow, you do get a return, but you're not sure what it will be. Sometimes it'll be 30, sometimes 60, sometimes 100, and sometimes double, as in the parable of the talents. But you don't know. So with trade, you know what you're going to get. You agree on exchanging one thing for another. Now, the other person may not necessarily be aware of what you're getting or why you're trading. So there's a story, it's called The Rembrandt and the Addict, and you may have heard it before. It's when someone went and bought a house because they saw an original Rembrandt painting in the attic. And so they knew that they weren't just getting the house, they were getting something that was going to sell for millions. If you've been to a Sotheby's auction for Rembrandt painting lately, you'll know that that's worth a lot more than an ordinary house. And so he bought the house because there was a Rembrandt in the attic, but the other person didn't know that that was valuable. So sometimes when you trade, part of the skill or the ability in trading is to know that someone is trading something for less than it's really worth. So, but you should know what you're getting because you are agreeing a trade beforehand. So you know what you're getting. Now, does it mean that it's definitely going to multiply to you? No. But the whole house could have burnt down the next day. There still can be loss, but not at the time of the trade. There is certainty about that. So that's one of the reasons I don't like when people say that they're trading in the stock market, because they are trading in terms of, I'm going to buy this one share for this amount of money, but actually they're attaching to that an expectation. They may do charts and probabilities and all that. Often there's an emotional or a hope attached to that the share will go up. And so they're hoping that the share will go up. So there's hope as well as an actual certainty about what they're getting. They're certain they're getting the share, but they're also hoping that they'll get more than that. And I guess every trade, Proverbs talks about the buyer says, oh, it's too expensive, but then he goes away and brags about what a bargain he got. So there's always some hope that you're getting more than you're paying for something. And that's what we call profit. That's fine. So with Jacob, he went on, and his next trade was, I think, even worse than the stew trade, because he traded his time for a woman. Now, a woman's very valuable, but he didn't even get the woman that he wanted. He wanted Rachel as his wife, and he was duped into getting actually Leah. And so then he had to pay double. So I'll pay another 7 years of my life. So I just wanted to highlight a lot of people in the world economy are trading their life, they're trading their time for something, and that's not necessarily a good trade. Now, I'm not saying quit your job today, especially if you've got a family to support. I'm not saying God told you to do that. I'm not saying it's evil if you do that. I'm just saying think about trade, because trading for time is not how Jacob got wealthy. But he did go on to make more trades, and I think they were better trades. So this time he traded for stock, and it was, sheep and goats, and they were the things, when the Bible describes how wealthy people were, one of the ways, the main way that it describes how people were, was their stock, and also gold and silver and servants. How many leveraged employees did they have working for them? So Jacob now starts stepping into this good trade where he's not trading his own time, which is limited. He's trading stock, which is leveraged. And his stocks start rapidly multiplying, increasing and multiplying, to the point where his employer, his sons get really upset because they can see all of their inheritance is slowly, bit by bit, or quickly actually, being traded to Jacob. And so it was a really good trade, and he ended up really wealthy. And so I wanted you to start thinking about trade. I think a lot of people, when they think about God blessing them or God multiplying them or prosperity coming to them, a lot of pastors I've heard mention like a transfer of wealth. The wealth of the wicked is laid up for the just or the righteous. They don't tell you how. And I think in our mind, because we've heard the pastor talk about offerings, and we've heard the pastor talk about tithes, and we've heard the pastor talk about sowing and reaping and giving. And all of those things are good, godly ways of using your finances. But another way of using everything you've got, your time and all of your resources, all of your creativity, your imagination, your emotions, your knowledge, your skills, your abilities, all of that can be traded, and it can be traded in a good trade. You can trade well. And so I want you to start thinking about those kind of trades. Hey, if this has helped, put a comment. Let me know if you think you'd like to know more about trade, if you've got any questions about it, because as I said, I'm going to be interviewing Amanda Wells on an upcoming episode of the podcast about trade, and I'm excited about that conversation. If you've got questions that you'd like Amanda to answer or me to answer, then put them in the comments, and I'd love to hear from you. If you've got any insights or revelation on trade yourself, or experiences or testimony, put them in the comments too, because I really, really want to hear them, and start this conversation about trade. I think it's going to really help a lot of people, and I'm glad that you're one of the people